So let's talk about heaven and hell. A lot of different thoughts, a lot of, a lot of different views on this within the Christian community. And so we got to tread lightly here. And we have to use a lot of humility when we think about these types of things. First of all, the nature of heaven and hell. There's some people that believe very literally in the descriptions of heaven and hell in the Bible. You know, whether it's streets of gold or lake of fire or whatever, they see that as very literal. That it's a real fire, that it's, the descriptions of heaven are very literal, whether it's talking about angels or whatever. And then there's others that see a lot of the language as very metaphorical. And a lot of the descriptions that we have of heaven and hell in the end times comes from the book of Revelation. And that style of literature is called apocalyptic. The deal with apocalyptic literature is that there's not a lot of it outside of the Bible. So we don't have a large body of apocalyptic literature where we can generalize on some basic rules like we can with poetry or narrative or other forms of literature. So we have to be very careful on how we look at this and try and understand, what is John saying? Where is he going with this? In my opinion, I believe a lot of what John is referring to actually, and the destruction, a lot of the very dark passages that talk about the destruction of the earth, I think a lot of it was fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And there's some towards the end of Revelation that give us hope towards a future when God restores all things. But a lot of the imagery that's been used, I look at it as fulfilled through what happened to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So some people look at a lot of these images as literal, some metaphorical. And then there's also the duration. When we talk about heaven and hell, how long is this? So what are we talking about? So there's some that believe, particularly when we're looking at the concept of hell, some believe that it's eternal, that the people that go there will be there for all eternity. And it will be painful and awful, and they'll be separated from God, and it'll just be eternal punishment. There's some that believe that it's conditional. And what I mean by this is that if you heard me read that one passage, it's called it the second death. So some people see this as, people that go to hell will eventually be exterminated. So just like we have a physical death on the earth, they will go to this place called hell where eventually they will die spiritually. And then there's a purgatorial view. And in the purgatorial view, it is believed that people go there for a period of time and their sins are purged. Just like costly stones or silver or gold, are put in the fire and the impurities bake out. Kind of that image of, people that still have sins will go to hell for a little while until all that sin is purged out of them, and then they can go back, and then they can go to heaven. And then there's also people that hold to a universal view, that eventually all people make it to heaven. However they get there or whatnot, eventually heaven will... God's grace is big enough to welcome all into heaven. And so I want you to understand there's good people within the Christian community that come from all four of these views. I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket and demand that you believe in one view and why the other three are wrong, but I want you to wrestle with it for yourself and not maybe easily grasp onto one because it's the easiest one that fits into your way of thinking, but really wrestle with all four. And think about it, look at it for yourself, and figure out what you believe. And then really ultimately the big difference, when we talk about heaven and hell, I think the big difference that we need to emphasize is that heaven is living in the presence of God and living in that full presence of His love, His grace, His peace, His joy. And the big difference of the concept of hell is understanding that it is the absence of God. It's the absence of His grace, of His love, of His patience. The opportunities that were given to us in our lifetime, they're gone. They're not there anymore. And it's living in, should I say, like complete selfishness, apart from His presence and apart from God's absence. So that's the big difference. And I want to just throw out a couple quotes to you from one of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. A lot of you guys know C.S. Lewis because he wrote the books, The Chronicles of Narnia. And on top of that, another interesting fact about him is that one of his best friends was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And these guys came up with some of the most amazing stories that are, kind of allegorical of our faith. But C.S. Lewis also wrote a lot of great books. And I challenge you, at some point in your life, pick up some of these books. Mere Christianity, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Screwtape Letters, great, great books. And he had some very interesting views on heaven and hell. And this quote comes from one of his books called The Great Divorce. He says this: "There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and then those whom God says in the end, 'Thy will be done.' All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and consistently desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek, find. To those who knock, it is opened." So what's interesting is what he's saying here is, two types of people. People that look to God and say to him, "Thy will be done." And then those who want to do their own will. And God essentially frees them to do that, to pursue their own will apart from him. And here's just a picture of C.S. Lewis. Kind of looks like, the kind of very cool guy. Lived during World War II, was a professor in England. And here's another quote from a book called God in the Docks. He says this: "It's not a question of God sending us to hell. In each of us there is something growing up which will of itself be hell unless it is nipped in the bud. The matter is serious. Let us put ourselves in his hands at once, this very day, this hour." So here it reminds us, it's not for us to look at people and put them into categories of who's going to heaven or who's going to hell, but understand that if we take a good hard look at ourselves, we want to make sure that we are constantly putting to death the sin nature within us and not allowing our lives to live like hell, but to live fully into the presence of God, of putting to death the sin nature and living in the fullness of the Spirit and allowing the Holy Spirit to just transform us into the likeness of Christ. And that's what our focus ought to be. And we ought to take that very, very seriously.